Se7en took me way too long to actually watch, and by me, I mean my partner and I. And by way too long, I think we had an unopened Blu-ray sitting on a shelf for like at least a year, gifted by a beloved friend who thought we would enjoy this movie. She was right. Don't ask me why we avoided watching it, because I don't really know. And I extend an earnest apology to this friend for doing that. Anyways, I'm obsessed, so let's talk about my hot take, which very well may be lukewarm, since this movie is older than I am. So after my first viewing of Se7en, I had a feeling that the discussion of old texts like Dante's Inferno, the Canterbury Tales, Paradise Lost, The Merchant of Venice, etc. yielded more than just a mechanic as to how the main serial killer is motivated to commit his crimes. So, working from the list of books that Somerset suggests they research, what I wanted to do is to take a closer look on the parallels between Dante's Divine Comedy and Se7en. So let's begin.
Fucking Dante. Goddamn poetry writing faggot piece of shit. Fucker.
Quick breakdown. Se7en, for those of you who haven't seen David Fincher's 1995 movie Se7en, it focuses on the retirement of Morgan Freeman's Detective Somerset and the hiring of Brad Pitt's Detective Mills. Somerset is retiring in 7 days and is helping Mills in the transition to fill his position in a new city infamous for rampant crime. 1 week before Somerset is meant to leave his job, a murder case opens up, which indicates the beginning of a series of killings. Quick breakdown. Dante's Divine Comedy is a long narrative poem written in the 1400s by Dante Alighieri, who inserts himself into the story as he journeys through hell, heaven, and everything in between, guided by the soul of the historical poet Virgil to reunite with his lover Beatrice, who had died an early death. Specifically, Virgil helps Dante to navigate Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. The poem dedicates entire sections to each of these parts of his journey. However, the Divine Comedy is most known for the depiction of hell in Inferno, which I will focus on most in this discussion. Comparison. The comparison of Se7en and the Divine Comedy is obvious. Even the movie itself references these materials quite directly. The murders that Mills and Somerset investigate explicitly represent the 7 deadly sins. Se7en and the Divine Comedy work with the concept of contrapasso. Contrapasso is Latin for suffer the opposite, which is a concept of being punished for your sins committed in your life. Such as the first murder as the heavy man who's forced to eat until his stomach bursts in Se7en, or in the Divine Comedy, the souls of fortune tellers doomed to have their heads turned backwards, or violent souls who are doomed to fighting each other aimlessly for eternity. While Dante works with a more divine punishment that acts as an eternal hell, the murderer in Se7en, who acts in the name of divine intervention, provides a more
He's dead. Thank you, Doctor.
permanent solution, for the most part. I do want to get into this further later in the video, but to extend this comparison, I wanted to talk about the sins that these stories work with. The Inferno section of the Divine Comedy is divided into 9 circles of hell, with punishments increasing in severity in accordance with the severity of the sin. In the Divine Comedy, Dante describes the different circles of hell and how each circle represents the increasingly worse offenses against God in the eyes of the poet. In descending order, the 9 circles of hell are divided into limbo, lust, gluttony, greed, wrathfulness and sullenness, heretics, violence, fraud, and betrayal. Se7en follows a similar pattern where the serial killer punishes his victims according to the sins he deems they committed. The murderer similarly uses the 7 deadly sins as his base for divine punishment. The 7 sins are gluttony, greed, sloth, lust, pride, wrath, and envy. Before I get to my big hot take TM, I wanted to also delve into some character comparisons and dig a little deeper into how those stories correlate. Somerset and Virgil. So one of the biggest overlapping comparisons of these two stories that I noticed was between Somerset and Virgil. Now, you may have suspected my big hot take by now, that I think Somerset is meant to be Virgil, or Virgil-like. And I don't know about you, but I think characterizing Somerset as the guide archetype is pretty well obvious. He's literally training Mills for his job, guiding him into the transition before he retires. It isn't a mic drop. And even if you didn't catch that similarity, I wouldn't blame you. I imagine you would simply nod and say, yeah, sounds right, and move on. I just want you to know that that is not my hot take. But I do want to get into my character analyses before we get into that hot take. So strap in. The soul of an ancient Roman poet who died in 19 BC acts as Dante's guide through the afterlife. Virgil resides in the first circle of hell, which serves as limbo, which is designated for those who were born before Christ and Christianity, considered as virtuous pagans, and those who were not baptized. Virgil explains to Dante what his role is in helping Dante, clarifying that he is to act as a guide through hell and illuminate the moral lessons of his journey.
But as for thee, I think and deem it well thou take me for thy guide, and pass with me through an eternal place and terrible, where thou shalt hear despairing cries, and see long-parted souls chat in their torments dire, howl for the second death perpetually.
Mills and Somerset are both detectives, and Dante and Virgil are both poets. Virgil and Somerset have the upper hand of experience. They both toured hell. Abandon all hope, ye who enter, is an inscription on the gates of hell, but easily could be the city's motto in Se7en. Virgil's experience of hell is filled with trepidation, much like Somerset's near-defeatist attitude towards society.
Down must we go to that dark world and blind, the poet said, turning on me a bleak, blanched face. I will go first, come thou behind. Then I, who had marked the color of his cheek, how can I go when even thou art white for fear, who art wont to cheer me when I'm weak? But he, not so, the anguish infinite they suffer yonder, paints my countenance with pity, which thou takest for affright. Come, we have far to go, let us advance.
Virgil feels pity and is sympathetic for those in limbo along with him, unlike what Dante thought he was feeling, fear. By retirement, Somerset is clearly broken down by the city he works in, but he keeps serving his community.
You know different, you know better.
I didn't say I was different or better. I'm not. Hell, I sympathize. I sympathize completely. Apathy is a solution. I mean, it's easier to lose yourself in drugs than it is to cope with life. It's easier to steal what you want than it is to earn it. Yeah. It's easier to beat a child than it is to raise it. Hell, love costs. It takes effort and work.
Somerset often feels the need to philosophically guide Mills through the moral and ethical dilemmas that are presented before them in their line of work. This instinct to protect him from the horrors of the detective work in a crime-ridden city expands to openly trying to shield Mills from a case he feels is too difficult for the fresh-faced detective.
And if I may speak freely,
we're all friends here.
this should not be his first assignment.
Oh, come on. I knew it. This is not my first assignment, you dick.
It's too soon for him.
Virgil often takes the paternal role for Dante in the same way, as Dante explains.
My leader on a sudden seized me up, even as a mother who by noise is wakened, and close beside her sees the unkindled flames, who takes her son and flies, and does not stop, having more care of him than of herself.
Virgil and Somerset have some pretty strong parallels that revolve around the concepts of being the guide and the parental figure. So now that we have a good grasp on this character comparison, let's move on to Mills and Dante. Mills and Dante. Mills is often presented as being stubborn and emotional.
Okay. It's impressive to see a man feeding off his emotions.
He's driven by his ideals and his simple worldview.
This guy's methodical, exacting, and worst of all, patient.
He's a nutbag. Just because the fucker's got a library card doesn't make him Yoda.
Mills constantly portrays himself as a good man, strong enough to handle his job without being let down by the horrors around him, like Somerset was.
I don't think you're quitting because you believe these things you say. I I don't. I think you want to believe him because you're quitting. You want me to agree with you, and you want me to say, yeah, you're right. It's all fucked up. It's a fucking mess. We should all go live in a fucking log cabin. But I won't. I won't say that. I don't agree with you. I do not. I can't.
Dante, in a somewhat similar manner, puts on a brave face in a tough situation.
Then I uprose, showing myself provided, better with breath than I did feel myself, and said, "Go on, for I am strong and bold."
In this quote, Dante pretends that he is less exhausted than he truly is, and declares he can continue on for Virgil, who, because he is a soul and has no physical form, has no difficulty traversing the terrain of hell. The comparison of Dante and Mills also extend to their romantic partners. Beatrice and Mills' wife, Tracy, are unfortunately not as fleshed out as the other characters, but we'll work with what we got. Beatrice is what motivates Dante to journey through the afterlife, as she was taken away too soon from the mortal world, dying an early death and leaving Dante. When she died, she was sent to Paradiso to spend her afterlife, which prompts Dante to travel through the various realms of the afterlife to reunite with her. Mill's wife is different, as he and Tracy are still together in the film, rather than following the same separation reunion storyline that Dante and Beatrice go on. Beatrice and Dante are meant to represent pure human love. Tracy and Mills also have a pureness to their relationship, with being high school sweethearts, a point that drew attention to itself by having Somerset ask about staying with someone for so long at a young age.
I understand you two were high school sweethearts.
Mm-hmm. Pretty hokey, huh? You know something? I knew on our first date that this was the guy I was gonna marry.
Really?
Mm-hmm. He was the funniest guy I'd ever met.
Really?
An interesting correlation that I noticed between those two love interests is that they both contact their partner's guide. Beatrice enlists Virgil to be Dante's guide on his journey to her via the help of some angels. Without running the idea by Mills prior to the invitation, Tracy invites Somerset to the dinner at their new apartment.
I've been invited to a late supper at your apartment.
Which is where we learn the detectives' first names, much like the blind introduction of Dante and Virgil.
William, I'd like you to meet David. David, this is good.
All right, I'll be right back.
I also want to point out that Cerberus, the three-headed dog, appears in the third circle of hell, guarding the souls tormented for their sins of gluttony. Mills and Tracy are shown to have 3 large dogs. I feel like the connection between Cerberus and Mills' pets is furthered by the first murder case being gluttony. Hot take. Now, unlike Se7en, Dante's Divine Comedy doesn't have a main villain, and while John Doe is controversially theorized to be the devil by the detectives in the film, the devil in the Divine Comedy only has a cameo, where Satan in Dante's poem is frozen in place from the eternal beating of his wings and is only briefly portrayed in the final circle of hell. While the Divine Comedy and Se7en have a lot of strong similarities, there are some distinct deviations. I feel like these deviations are more important to look at than to draw further comparisons, as that is already heartily established in the film. So after my second or third viewing, I believe, I determined that there is something to work with these deviations. I propose that Se7en is if Dante failed his task and did not finish his journey back to Beatrice. Tracy, while she is alive in Se7en, unlike Beatrice, is emotionally distant. She admits to be struggling with the move, complaining of having no allies. Once she meets Somerset, she seeks to have a friendship with him, even asking for emotional support from him.
I need someone to talk to. Do you think you could meet me somewhere, maybe tomorrow morning?
I don't understand.
I feel stupid calling, but you're the only person that I know here There's no one else.
This friendship was barely more than an acquaintanceship, having only met once before. But Somerset agrees to meet up with her, seeming to be affected by the upset in her voice at the request. Once Somerset and Tracy meet up at the diner, Tracy reveals to him her true thoughts about the move and that she recently learned she was pregnant.
David and I are gonna have a baby.
This leads to Somerset asking about whether she intended to keep the baby, which is clearly an enormously intimate conversation to be having with someone you don't know. This information is revealed to be even more intimate, as Tracy admits that she hasn't even told Mills yet. Tracy doesn't say one way or another about her intentions, and before she is able to, the conversation is cut abruptly short when Somerset has to leave. This is, essentially, the last time Tracy is seen. I know she appears once more when Mills says he loves her while they curl up in bed, but this is the last time she is given any character development. Only at the end of the movie, when Somerset finds Tracy's head in a box, does Somerset reveal to Mills that he and Tracy had this secret meeting, in his effort to protect Mills from the knowledge of his unborn child. I suspect Somerset's urge to protect Mills was likely what Tracy wanted out of that conversation with Somerset. She knew the state of the city as exhibited by her final judgment of the city's public school system, and is clearly upset by her findings.
I've been going around, looking at schools. But the conditions here are horrible.
What about private schools?
I don't know.
Tracy knew that her husband would be working a dangerous and stressful job in a city such as that, talking to his peer in his field, even if that peer would only be there for 1 week more. It seems that Tracy was counting on that, hoping that possibly being enough time to talk Mills out of keeping that job, or protect him for that week, something. Her hesitation to keep the baby seemed clearly connected to the state of that city, at the idea of bringing up a child in that environment. The same need to protect her loved one extending to this potential child. This protection from the sidelines reminds me of how Beatrice enlists Virgil to be Dante's guide, who acts not only as a navigational help, but as a moral guide. Tracy, in a sense, died when she arrived at that city. Her entire character was tainted with sadness and despair, as if she already knew that one way or another, this is the end.
I got to go.
William? Thank you.
This feeling of defeat is connected to the city inherently. Despite the city being Gotham-esque, morally conflicted centerpiece of the story, the city in Se7en is never named. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. This inscription greets souls at the gates of hell. The choice to make that city that is so tainted and diseased and centering on all the torment of the characters who reside in it, being unnamed, is bold. This boldness must mean something, yes? I suggest that the city is in fact hell. The city being unnamed, the reason for Mills' arrival is also indefinite. There is never a true answer, just as there's never a true answer as to how Dante arrived to meet Virgil.
Midway this way of life we're bound upon, I woke to find myself in a dark wood, where the right road was wholly lost and gone. Ay me, how hard to speak of it, that rude and rough and stubborn forest. The mere breath of memory stirs the old fear in the blood. It is so bitter, it goes nigh to death. Yet there I gained such good that, to convey the tale, I'll write what else I found therewith.
This atmosphere of ambiguity is continued in almost every direction of Se7en, creating an otherworldly feeling in the story. As well, in this unnamed city of the damned, the police force in this story is depicted as alarmingly incompetent and uncaring. Our first glimpse of the immorality of the General Police Department and the detectives Mills and Somerset is shown at the very beginning, juxtaposing their views on how the job should be done versus the ones to first respond to the scene.
The kid.
What kind of fucking question is that? You know, we are all going to be real glad when we get rid of you, Somerset. You know that? It's always these questions with you. Did the kid see it? Who gives a fuck? He's dead. His wife killed him. Anything else has nothing to do with us.
7, hold on.
That's not even my desk.
But he's had his face in a plate of spaghetti for about 45 minutes now.
Wait a minute. No one bothers vital signs?
Did I stutter? This guy ain't breathing unless he started breathing spaghetti sauce.
So that's how it's done around here.
I beg your pardon, detective.
But if it is hell, who's being punished? Is it everyone involved? Is it the criminals? Is it Somerset who witnesses all this violence? Our conception of hell in media has the devil towering over all, personally sending his demons out to torture all the sinful souls sent below for all eternity. Though in Dante's Inferno, Satan does not appear until Dante reaches the final circle of hell, right before entering Purgatorio. Satan is frozen in place, chilled from his constantly flapping wings, acting as an obstacle and a path into Purgatorio by climbing Satan's feet. So clearly Satan doesn't have a very active role in Inferno, instead of the hands-on personal tormentor that he is typically depicted as. If Satan is presented so passively in Inferno, it would suggest that there is no Satan in 7. And while it is suggested that John Doe, the serial killer enacting contrapasso on the people of the city, is Satan, Somerset is quick to dismiss that idea.
If we catch John Doe, and he turns out to be the devil, I mean, if he's Satan himself, that might live up to our expectations, but he's not the devil. He's just a man.
John Doe. If you hadn't noticed, I haven't talked quite much about him at all. And no, this avoidance is only slightly influenced by the fact that the character is played by Kevin Spacey. But who is John Doe? Let's talk about the name John Doe for a moment. John Doe is a name given to the bodies found that cannot be identified. I understand that the character uses this moniker to his benefit, to help himself get away with his murders, which is furthered by giving attention to the fact that he regularly seared off his fingerprints and that he is therefore completely untraceable to the police. Anonymity in 7 is important to its plot. As I've emphasized, even the city isn't named. So it's a very important feature of 7. A very subtle, quickly forgotten line in 7 is said by Mills, which is what my hot take relies on most. What was his name? In this scene, Mills is trying to remember the first and only person he shot while on duty. Somerset, prior to the scene, indicates that it isn't very common, even in a tough city like the one he's worked into retirement, for a detective to actually discharge a weapon, and it's even less common to actually kill someone. So an event like this would stick out, especially as the man Mills describes to have shot died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, a ride that Mills attended. Yet Mills doesn't even know the name of the man he shot. This would, at least in this detective's eyes, make him a John Doe. So John Doe, brutally killed by a detective who likely should have never drawn his weapon, is discarded, forgotten, without even a name for his killer to remember him by. Knowing this, let's look at the murders that John Doe commits in the name of divine justice. Each leave little mark in the grand scheme of things. The gluttony murder is merely used as a stepping stone, a hint to the next death in the series. The pride murder is but a drop in the bucket, easily forgotten, sandwiched between bigger plot points. The lust killing, while grotesque and given a considerable amount of screen time, is given little attention to the identity of the victim, only seen as a mere prostitute. However, when we look at Wrath and Envy, they are the piece de resistance. In my interpretation, these installments of the 7 deadly sin murders are the actual focus. While theoretically working with John Doe's system of divine justice, sure, the murder victims prior to Wrath and Envy are validated, as in they perpetuate the crimes that they are deemed to have committed. It just doesn't hold the same impact upon the audience, the police, the detectives, or the society. The methods don't make sense. The victims seem to be chosen at random, with little connecting them. It seems that John Doe had chosen the sin and the contrapasso before the unfortunate soul who would be receiving his terrible punishment, which is really odd. Usually in murders, especially in fictionalized murders, the victims are chosen with passion and precision, not just to fit a checklist. This checklist system works with each murder except the final 2. Mills was chosen by John Doe, and that is evident by the extremity of his decision to die at the cost of punishing Mills.
Shut up! That's what he wants. He wants you to shoot him. No!
Mills is the only one who isn't killed by John Doe, but instead punished for what we could all assume all of eternity. There's no closure for us about what happens to Mills after this, besides being arrested. Even in the original ending, which was changed at the behest of the studio, in which the ending was left ambiguous, there's no arrest scene of Mills. He could have been shot by Somerset, the helicopter team, or executed after serving his sentence. Still, in both of these endings, Mills' fate is unknown. The presumption set by John Doe is that yes, he will suffer for what happened to his wife, and in killing John Doe, he will suffer for that too, either in the prison system or morally. But for the audience, this punishment is indefinite. I would liken this indefinite sphere of punishment to the circles of hell, this eternal punishment for sins. While it is clear that John Doe would be motivated to punish Mills in the afterlife, is he deserving of it? Like Dante, Mills shows a strong, almost stubborn perspective of morality.
It's more comfortable for you to label me insane.
It's very comfortable.
When it is clear that Somerset and Mills both show disgust and disappointment with the state of affairs, Somerset offers some sobering advice on the type of outlook to have in that environment.
But you gotta be a hero. You want to be a champion. Well, let me tell you, people don't want a champion. They want to eat cheeseburgers, play the lotto, and watch television.
Hey, how did you get like this?
Mills rejects this mentality wholeheartedly, but this was before he was faced with what John Doe had in store for him. Virgil acts in a similar manner to Somerset by feeling pity or disgust on the souls of the underworld that Dante and him come across on their journey.
Then my guide spoke out with a vehemence such as I never had heard him use before. O Capaneus, since thy proud insolence will not be quenched, thy pains shall be more. No torment save thine own hot rage could be a fitting cautery to thy rabid sore. Then said, with milder mouth turning to me, this was one of the 7 kings who pressed the siege of Thebes. He held and seemingly still holds God's light and flouts him with a jest.
Capaneus is an example of one of the many souls they come across, this particular one causing disgust in Virgil for his lack of regret. In this behavior, Dante reveres Virgil and follows his footsteps. Upon seeing Satan for the first time, Dante writes,
and said, behold now, behold the place where thou must steel thy soul with constancy. How cold I grew, how faint with fearfulness. Ask me not, reader, I shall not waste breath, telling what words are powerless to express. This was not life, and yet it was not death. If thou hast wit to think how I might fare, bereft of both, let fancy aid thy faith.
Mills and Dante are both often stunned by the behavior put before them. reacting quite dramatically.
And I, amid the weeping and the woe, accursed spirit, do thou remain and rot. I know thee, filthy as thou art, I know.
However, Dante grows to show a restraint that Mills is not quite equipped with.
Could I have kept the fire off there below, I'd have leapt down to them, and I declare, I think my tutor would have let me go. But I'd have burnt and baked me so, that fear quite vanished the goodwill which made me yearn to clasp them to my bosom then and there. So I began. Indeed, indeed, not scorn, but heartfelt grief to see your tribulation, pierced me too deeply to be soon outsworn.
In this passage, it is shown that Dante would have embraced those that he knew, members of the same political faction as his. And while he knew Virgil would not disapprove, he decides not to, explaining that he does not fear the flames, and not because of their sins. His hesitation is juxtaposed with Mills' righteous impulsiveness, who determines to break down the door to John Doe's apartment, despite Somerset's advice not to do so. The stubbornness of these two characters show moral strength in one and moral weakness in the other. So while Dante grows to follow Virgil's footsteps, a guide not only in the strict sense of the word, but in morality too, Mills falls behind. So why would John Doe be tasked with punishing Mills? John Doe is proven to be motivated to enact this eternal punishment, but he's not Satan as established by the film. As mentioned in Dante's Inferno, Satan is frozen. The only punishment he casts out on himself is reserved for the biggest transgressors in Christianity, such as Judas. So in all likelihood, John Doe is another demented soul, a demon sent to punish Mills, one that will get his job done and maybe enjoy it too.
Nothing wrong with a man taking pleasure in his work. I won't deny my own personal desire to turn each sin against the sinner.
So when Mills is faced with a moral dilemma in the face of the afterlife, one with a connection to his mortal life, and fails to do the righteous thing, he fails where Dante succeeds, and thus Somerset, acting as the Virgil of the damned city, waits for his next Dante to come in.
Where are you gonna be?
Around. I'll be around.
I spilled my beer. I spilled it really bad. It's in my socks. It's in my socks. Sorry for taking so long making another video. I would say I have an excuse, but really I was just tired and I don't want to do it. But I feel like that is an excuse, so I'm sorry if that's gonna happen. But life be like that, am I right? Yeah. I actually had this script in the works for like quite some time, but then I just could not get around to editing it. And considering how difficult it was trying to record this, considering I have beer in my socks, I'm gonna say my hesitation was probably correct. But nonetheless, I'm intending to. Also, the beer made me really warm and it's fogging up my glasses. So if you like can't see one of my eyes throughout this entire video, which is entirely possible, I haven't reviewed it yet. That's why I get really hot when I drink beer, but I kept slurring my words, so I drank a beer to prevent that, which is funny considering. Anyways, but it made me sound kind of less panicky, but I always sound panicky because I have tachycardia. Embarrassing. This video is a lot shorter, I believe, than my lighthouse video. So I'm experimenting with like maybe like shorter analyses, because my lighthouse one was pretty intense considering how many other texts I bring in. But this one was just Dante's Inferno, so hopefully, I can do stuff more like that, because the lighthouse one, as difficult as this one was, the lighthouse video was a lot more difficult to make. Anyways, nonetheless, hopefully I have fun with this, and you have fun with this, so then it's even funner for me. Comment below if you thought I missed something, or if you were like, hey, should have expanded on that, and then we can discuss it in the comments, perhaps. That would be fun. Or if you were like, wow, I had no idea this could be interpreted like this. That would, feedback. Cool. It's fun. Yeah. So, like, follow, subscribe, etc. I have a website, seforishare.com. Once again, I got really tired, didn't want to deal with anything, so I'm kind of behind on my blog posts / articles. But hopefully I can get those revving up. I have a couple of book reviews that I'm going to put out. I also have a podcast that I'm putting out, that I'm featured on, that I will announce once I actually get all that together. But, keep an eye on that. But I'll see you in the next video.